And we start with Fox Sports broadcaster, longtime college football, and done so much out through his career when it comes to television and play-by-play, and even the days on ESPN, Tim Brando, one of the great guests we have on this show. Timmy B, how's your golf game?
Well, I played very well in Memphis at the St. Jude. Thanks for asking. It's about to be put in mothballs. I am going to play on Friday. Toying with the idea of taking them with me to San Diego if I can get an early tee time on Thursday when I get there. But if I can't, then they'll probably be in mothballs until March of next year. Such is the life of yours truly. It's time to get down to business and put them away. I did play great, had a wonderful time. The people at St. Jude do such a marvelous job, and it's uplifting, it's inspirational. It's just a feel good every time I go. And I actually played really well this time. So a lot of fun. I was also really happy to be able to get out to TPC Southwind and be behind the 18th and the VIP tents there and see while they were all sweating through their pants to see a guy like Lucas Glover, make the kind of comeback that he has in his career. I know Lucas. I met him on a couple of different occasions. Once here when Hal Sutton and David Toms had a charity event right after he had won the U.S. Open. He was very young then, very humble. A lot's happened to him since then, and to come back from, the Corn Ferry Tour to get his card back, just to get his playing status back, and now here he is on the precipice of playing his way onto the Ryder Cup team. That's some pretty special stuff. It was fun to see.
Tim, you pretty much accurately predicted and called what was going to happen with the Pac-12 as soon as USC and UCLA left. And as soon as that story kind of comes to a close there, we have strife in the ACC and Florida State making a lot of noise. This one's different than all the rest. How does this play out, and how does this play out for Florida State, who is obviously very noisy, but we don't really know what their plan is?
Right now, they can think and want all they want, but I just don't think that the landscape will allow them to go through private equity and spend that kind of money in an investment with major financial repercussions that you'd have to pay back to get out of a league when you're not sure that another league really wants you. The league of choice for them is the ACC. Is the SEC, and there's history there, and it's really not their administration's fault, but it's history. People forget this, but when all of this started, when Roy Kramer was the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, and he wanted to break up his league into two divisions and have the very first playoff game back in 1992, his targets included Florida State. And Bobby Bowden, God rest his soul, I still say this about Bobby. You can argue whether he's among the greatest of all time. I think he certainly is among the greatest of all time. Not the greatest, but certainly among them. But he is the greatest man, the greatest individual that I ever met that coached college football. The things he did for people and the way he adjusted and adapted to the times for a man of his age. And had that run. Really, it was sort of an Atlanta Braves type of run, with the 14 straight divisional crowns. To have done what he did over 15 straight seasons, to not have finished lower than fifth in the AP poll, the final AP poll, that's amazing. If we had a 14 playoff during the time Bobby Bowden was coaching, all those wide rights wouldn't have mattered. He would have been in all of those national championship hunts. And, he won two and he lost, a couple, but he won two. And he would have probably played in at least a half dozen more. And God only knows how many he would have gotten. But Bobby had to build that program at Florida State from a women's teachers college, that was dormant. And there was nothing there when he took over. They had virtually no success at all. He scheduled as an independent, he scheduled all these teams 4-for-1s, 3-for-1s with teams like Pitt when they were awesome, Nebraska when they were awesome, LSU, Ohio State. He was playing making deals to play 4-for-1s and 3-for-1s at a time when Florida State was beginning to take off in 1979 to 80, 81, 82, 83. And by the time we got to the mid-'80s, all the way through to the late 90s, that was a dynasty that he had that was marching along at the same time. Schnellenberger got it going at Miami, and then Jimmy Johnson followed. And then after Jimmy came Erickson, and after Erickson came Coker, and then, of course, Butch Davis. All those guys ran through Miami. Bobby's still over there at Florida State, getting it done. And when the opportunity came to go to the SEC, he said it to himself, and he was very forthright about it. Why do I want to put myself through that? I mean, I'm already playing Florida at the end of the year, and the ACC, after being an independent and struggling all those years, going into the ACC made a lot of sense. It actually made his schedule easier, and he knew that. I mean, he really knew it, and he was going to take advantage of it because he had paid the piper all those years when he was constructing the program. But it's not lost on anybody in the Southeastern Conference that Florida State turned down a chance to come into their beloved league. And I don't think that'll ever be forgotten. And, of course, in addition to that, you've got the Florida market already. Florida's still the dominant program from an alumni-based standpoint. And in many ways, the dominant program still in the state. That was true even when Bobby was at Florida, and he was going up against Steve Spurrier all those years. Lost one title to him, but he had his fair share of wins against Steve as well. But no, that's not going to happen. And why would you go through, trying to move heaven and earth when you don't know where you're going to land? And right now, Florida State has no place, there's no runway for them to land on. There's no landing strip long enough right now for Florida State to find a home anywhere other than where they are, and that's the ACC.
Tim, if you were brought in, Oliver Luck, for example, to try and help some of these Pac-12 schools, and I know with him it's Washington State and Oregon State, but just the chatter that you hear and just your own thoughts, what do you make of the present of the Pac-12, and most importantly, what do you make of the future or lack thereof of the Pac-12 for those four schools?
Well, I think that on the one hand, you would think that because of the history and tradition of both Cal and Stanford, and look, we're not that far removed from Christian McCaffrey playing at Stanford and them carrying the banner really for the Pac-12 for a period of about 7 to 8 years, winning championships. They had runners up for the Heisman, going back to Toby Gerhardt, a program that had John Elway in it and his dad Jack as a coach. I mean, there's a lot of history there. Marshawn Lynch at Cal, Aaron Rodgers at Cal, Jared Goff at Cal, played for Spike Dykes. But neither one of those programs have reinvested any of the television revenue that they've gotten from the Pac-12 in recent years back into their football programs. You notice it the moment you get there. So the more viable programs are actually the ones in the small places, in the hinterlands. Corvallis, Oregon, where Jonathan Smith has a really good team. Hell, they could win the Pac-12. They could. They're really good. Washington State's also a quality program that has managed to survive and do well post Mike Leach. I think a lot of people, a lot of doomsayers didn't think that could happen. Wazoo's been okay. I think all four of those schools would be very wise to play it safe for the time being, listen to all the different overtures that could come their way. I suspect that the Mountain West would be very interested. I also suspect the American would be very interested. Both of those leagues, even though they're not considered autonomous or Power Fives, they do have linear television contracts and actually are in a better position to grow those contracts than the ACC would be. The ACC is stuck in a bad TV deal that's not going to go away until 2036. So if I were those four, I would have an open conversation with both the leaders of the Mountain West and the American, and see what the future could hold for them as the changing landscape continues. Remember, all those teams wanted to compete at the high Division I level. All of them realize that the expansion of the playoff is going to get to 12 in the 2024-25 season, and that will go to probably 16 when the new TV deal is done in 2026. So finding ways to get together so that more of you can be valuable and more numbers gives you added strength. It'll be very interesting to see what they intend to do and how they can cooperate with one another. I think that's the best way for those programs to look, whether you're in the Silicon Valley and you have the reputations academically of Cal or Stanford, or if you're those programs that are considered not necessarily from an academic standpoint at the same level, but from a football standpoint, playing at a much higher level than either Stanford or Cal. I think the commonality here is they're all looking for a home, and the best home for them, I think, would be in their region of the country, as opposed to trying to find a way to hook up with Commissioner Jim Phillips and the ACC. The ACC's got their own share of major problems right now. I wouldn't want to put myself into that soap opera if I were those four schools.
Tim, you hear there is some who have this feeling that we're going to these super conferences. It's out there. And there's also like this feeling that's just going to happen. I know that you have talked about the narrative of some, the elite, who want that to happen. Can you ever see, honestly, 18 to 36 teams, and that's it, who can win a national title in college football?
Well, many would argue that that's been the case for a long time, David. I mean, a lot of people would say that's been true, really. Look at the teams that have actually won national championships. I think the last outlier, would it be safe to say, was Robbie Bosco and BYU? I think so. I think that would be the last so-called outlier, and that was in an old bowl system that would enable them to be undefeated and beat at the time 6-5 Michigan team, and that would be enough to win a national championship. Well, those days are over. We know that'll never happen again. But I do think that we're a long ways from going to those everybody's going to have 20 teams right now routine. I don't see that happening. I see the Big Ten very satisfied at 18. I see the SEC happy to be at 16. The Big 12 could be continuing to move and shake. You know, the guy that is going to stir this pot is the guy that's looking to create more revenue streams, and that's to the Big 12. You know, Brett Yormark, while he would be, I think, probably considered in the shadow to some extent of both Commissioner Sankey and Commissioner Petiti of the SEC and the Big Ten, he's the guy that's out there making waves. He's the guy out there that's he was the one most responsible for the Pac-12 going under. I don't know if you heard his interview with John Orand and Andrew Marchand on their podcast that they do covering the media, but he was exceedingly forthright and candid and said, I didn't know that I could do what I did, but I did it, and we managed to pull it off. It was, I didn't know that after I got Colorado, I just had to get those other schools, and I get that. He's a New York lawyer with a background in public relations that helped bring NASCAR to the forefront of sports in our society in the last decade or more. And he's a guy that sees and has vision for what can happen, not just in the here and now, but 10 years down the road. He may be the visionary of this group, but I do think that without Petiti and Sankey having the stewardship as the two big conferences moving forward, I think he's got to have great relationships with both of them. And I think he will. I think he'll develop that over time. I think that maybe it was a little strained for a period there with Sankey, but I think it's being improved largely because Tony Petiti now has developed a good relationship with Greg Sankey, something Kevin Warren of the Big Ten when he was there never had.
Tim Brando with us, Fox Sports on 365 Sports.
Tim, any big thoughts that came away from that preseason top 25 poll? Anything, just a couple major, takeaways from seeing that?
Well, it didn't look anything like my top 10, did it?
No.
And the reason is they don't put any thought into it. I can't imagine all these writers just decide, okay, well, who are we going to put in there? Let's go ahead and let's get those recruiting sheets. Who's got the most 5 stars? Mm-hmm. All right, who's got the most 4 stars? Who's got the most returning letterman? All right, let's see the big brands here. Okay, USC is the biggest brand in the Pac-12. We're going to rank them higher than anybody else. Forget the fact that Utah beat them twice last year. Forget the fact that Oregon is probably on paper this year a better team. No, we're going to go with USC. That's what we're going to do. Okay, in the Big 12, now let's see who do we have. Okay, TCU coming off a year when they finished second, made it all the way to the finals. They lost their quarterback, lost Kendra Miller, their running back. Schedule maybe a little tougher. We're not going to go with them. Kansas State, they're in Manhattan, Kansas. Forget the fact that Kansas State has been owning Texas for quite some time. It doesn't matter. Texas is Texas. We're going to put Texas there. Okay, Texas is there, even though they haven't won a Big 12 since 2009. It is nothing more. The AP poll and the coaches. And by the way, we used to make fun of the coaches poll for having the sports information director spill it out for the coaches. Remember all that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's been a narrative for a long, long time. Well, this time it looked like the writers simply looked at the coaches poll and said, I'm not going to go against that. Oh, well, we can flip 3 for 4. We'll flip Ohio State and Alabama. But, after that, let's just go right down they're the same. It's nothing more than a starting grid for the elite brand names in college football so they can make sure that they get the same damn 4 teams in the same damn bogus college football playoff that we've had to deal with since 2014. It's a joke. It's a crock. And the fact that legitimate media, I heard Ralph Russo today a little bit talking about, there's all these blue bloods. Well, why are all these blue bloods in there? Because you want them in there. That's why they're there, because the writers don't want to have to work and find out more about the Kansas States, the Baylors, the Texas Techs, teams that could make a move. God forbid a team like Tulane, any team that would be from a group of 5 getting any love whatsoever. They just play to the same damn narrative and this propaganda that the college football playoff has been delivering, and it's been so bogus for so long that we finally were able to kick it out and have some sanity come into the process and get to an expanded playoff format. Maybe then they'll consider it. You can take shots at my top 10 if you want. You can say, Brando, you're wrong about Tulane. South Alabama will beat them right out of the gates. Good. If South Alabama is good enough, they damn near beat UCLA at UCLA last year before I had UCLA beating Utah the following week. If they get a victory against Tulane, good. They might be this year's Tulane. But Tulane beat Kansas State and USC last year, and they returned a lot of players from the season ago. They don't get the same kind of recognition that USC gets, and they didn't win the Pac-12, and they didn't beat Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. It's a joke. It's a crock. It's been that way for a long time, and when so-called legitimate media that covers college football looks at putting together a preseason top 25, and they just develop a starting grid based on 5 stars and brand names and don't consider who the teams are playing, where they are playing, what time of the season they're playing them, what sandwich game might be between 2 big games that are on their schedules. If you're not considering any of that, what are you doing? Like I said, you can poke holes in my 10. That's fine. But my methodology is far superior to what the AP and the coaches poll is doing. I'm actually looking and saying, okay, here's who's so-and-so's playing. I believe if they win that game, they're going to be set up in a very good position. Michigan is in a great spot with a bad non-conference schedule. The only one that's worse is Georgia's. And both, so I went with chalk there. I did. But Ohio State could lose to Notre Dame. They could. Alabama just automatically has to be no worse than 4th. The hell with that. Alabama could easily lose 4 games. They almost lost 4 games last year. But what's the narrative? Oh, Nick Saban was 2 plays away from being undefeated. It's whatever they want it to be. And they'll justify it however they want. It's the biggest problem the college game has had. And people wonder, why are we going through these tumultuous times? Why are we having to shake it up and make changes the way we're making them? This is why. College football should be open for business for all 133 Division I-A teams with players who put their jock straps on the same way as all the blue bloods do. And yet from the jump, we're going to give those blue bloods a starting grid. I mean, it's worse than telling Mario Andretti in the 70s, we're going to give you a 10-lap lead in the Indy 500. It's a joke.
Nick Saban was two.
Tell us how you really think, Tim. We appreciate that.
Nick Saban was 2 plays away from being undefeated. Is Nick Saban's line to the alumni so they don't go, Coach, what's wrong? And it's somehow everybody else bought it too. He was also 2 plays away, like you said, of having 4 losses.
He manipulates the media the same way he manipulates his players. Look, Nick's the greatest that's ever coached the game. No one's done more with a different staff and done it adapting to a style of play that was changing any better than Nick Saban. And now he's kind of going in a role reversal and going to get downhill, rely on his offensive line and his defense a bit more because his quarterback room is not up to snuff, because he didn't go to the portal after Drake May said no at North Carolina. He didn't really challenge to get another player out of the portal to be his quarterback. But so he's going to try to go back and do it the old-fashioned way. And he might pull it off. He might. But Nick's convenient truths, all right, that he uses on his players, and it works. Psychologically, it works. Kirby Smart's doing the same thing at Georgia. Kirby was able to convince his team and the media that they didn't get any respect last year. Really. He learned from the best. Like I said, I've known Nick a long time. I have tremendous respect, but he will never be able to manipulate me the way he's able to apparently manipulate all my colleagues. These guys go in, those that are in his circle, you know who the writers are. They're his favorites. He goes to them. He gets it out, and they spread the word. They spread the Saban gospel, and everybody buys in.
Tim, a couple of questions from our audience, if you don't mind, in the chat room. From Chris on Florida State. Can the ACC in any way hold them accountable for damaging the brand?
Not really. No. No. They're a member institution that has it's paid its grant of rights. Their president has chosen to go public. And apparently their athletic director is okay with that as well. I think, to be perfectly honest, the Miamis and the Clemsons are really happy that Florida State's put themselves out there on this public relations island, because they feel similarly. They want to do the same things. But look, you're stuck. I mean, you're stuck. And since you mentioned that, let me go back to this, okay, for just a second. You no doubt have seen some of these articles that have come out since the Pac-12 folded. Oh, it's the end of 100 years of tradition with the Pac. Listen, I know that. I grew up on the Rose Bowl being the granddaddy of them all, and that's where the Pac-8 in the old days would meet the Big Ten. I grew up on all that. But in the moment, the Rose Bowl, people forget that the Rose Bowl disassociated itself from that contractually over a year ago. They saw the writing on the wall. They will be a part of the rotation in the college football playoff for a national championship game, and they'll be having these semifinal games, maybe, if they have quarterfinals, they could be part of that. But I think they'll always have either a semifinal or a final. But when people are actually writing this, okay, and it was out there, most of them bleeding heart liberals that want to claim that television, the networks, conspired against the Pac-12, that they simply wanted to run the Pac-12 out of business. How dare television do this to college? Television has been funneling the revenue into these schools that they've misappropriated their funds and paid off coaches by making them associate ADs, wasting cash on top of cash. Bino Cook was talking to me about that years ago. Brando, it doesn't matter how many guys they fire. They'll become associate ADs. They'll pay them $500,000 for the end of their contracts. And how much more money? And then they'll go back to television and say, We need more money. It's the one thing that all schools have in common, no matter the league, all right? An insatiable appetite to spend television money. That's been going on for years. How dare some of these scribes come out and tell those of us in television, oh, no, it's the people that employ us that are responsible for putting the guillotine to the Pac-12. Here's what happened to the Pac-12. Larry Scott was a bad commissioner. He couldn't get Texas, and he couldn't get Texas Tech and all the other teams in the Big 12 because ESPN got in their way and created a $300 million mistake with the Longhorn Network. And when that happened, that ended Larry Scott's goals. And he stopped working. And then he decided to say no to either Disney or Fox and start his own network on his own and put the facilities for the network in San Francisco, of all places. It costs a lot of money to operate. And he ran the entire league into a financial ditch. George Kliavkoff comes in, well-meaning. I like him. I've met him. But he was not ready for what had already happened. This ditch that had been dug by Scott, who preceded him, was huge. And then he was asleep at the wheel when Brett Yormark came in and decided to hurry, get out in front of the Pac-12, and cut a deal. And he managed to do one with both ESPN and Fox that is netting the teams that were left behind by Oklahoma and Texas, two of the biggest brands of the sport. Those schools are making more money annually now with OU and Texas out of the league than they did when OU and Texas were in the league. So who's responsible for the Pac-12 woes? The leadership of the Pac-12. Those ADs and those presidents waited as long as they could to see what Kliavkoff could come up with. The clock was ticking. Apple said, you gotta let us know by noon on Friday. Here's your offer. All they could come up with was an incentive-based, digital-only deal that didn't guarantee the same amount of money for the next 7 to 8 years, and those ADs and presidents were not going to take it. Not when they knew they had options. The bat phone was ringing at the Big Ten office, and Brett Yormark was getting his dream come true. That's what happened to the Pac-12. It was a single car accident in a ditch. Television did what they could to pick up the carnage afterwards and find homes for as many teams as they could. Enough with that. I am tired of hearing television is the problem. Okay? Television was a problem for writers the moment we started having primetime games and they couldn't get their byline in the Sunday morning paper. I've heard this crap for 5 decades. Enough already.
Chat from Kim. Brando is the best guest ever. More importantly, speaks the truth. Kim, thanks for the super chat. And then one more thing. We mentioned the top 25, and Katie Rader's a huge Texas Tech fan. They're right on the cusp, right outside the top 25. Yeah. That was perhaps one that most people thought might end up somewhere between, 20 and 25?
I think I had them on my just out list. I think I had Texas Tech on my just out list. So, I think I ranked about 6 other teams. I didn't put rankings by them, but I said 6 teams to keep an eye on, and Texas Tech was one of them. The schedule is really tough. Otherwise, I think they would have probably cracked the top 25. More than likely would have cracked the top 25. They're very, very close. That Oregon game is huge. Mm-hmm. See, I'm counting on Oregon to win that game. That's why I've got them at 3. I think that would be a huge road win for Oregon that helps jettison them up. Now, if I'm wrong and Texas Tech wins, they'll be ranked, and they'll be ranked in a hurry.
Timbo, thank you for your time, man. Timmy B, Fox Sports with us. We appreciate the time. Great to see you on the Zoom. Tim Brando, Fox Sports with us quite a bit on 365 Sports.